So good evening, everybody. So we'll begin today's webinar. So PMS CIF World has organized the webinar with Marcellus Investment Managers. So we are a wealth manager and we manage close to 400 crores in assets across 100 families. And today is very special because we are hosting Marcellus, who were one of the best performers in our recently hosted PMS and AIF awards in collaboration with IIM Ahmedabad, and that is really exciting. They have done some good work, and so Rakshit and Pramod is here today with us. Unfortunately, Saurabh Mukherjee couldn't make it due to ill health, and I am sure that Rakshit and Pramod will be able to step in their shoes quite efficiently. So we will begin with a thought, and the thought that is resonating amongst most investors right now is, are we in a bear market rally, or is this a more constructive or structural bull run and we have left behind all worries? So we will take that from you, Rakshit, or Pramod, whoever is willing to take it. So over to you guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Uncle. Well, this is pretty much the most often asked question these days, right? Given the pace at which the markets have rebounded from the lows of 23rd March has taken everybody by surprise. And it's justified in some ways to ask that question, whether this is a bear market rally. Have we seen the bottom? Is there going to be a double dip and all that? The simple answer to that is we don't know. And my guess is nobody knows. But rather than trying to second guess stock prices from a short-term perspective, we'll try and focus on fundamentals. And if you were to focus on fundamentals, I'd like to point you to one slide which focus on what the events of the last 3-4 months means for the Indian economy, right? Forget about the stock price movements, the Nifty movements. Like I said, in the short term, the market movements are not just difficult, perhaps even impossible to predict. But what in turn we can do to get a sense of the macro, at least, before we come to Marcellus's portfolios, is what have the events of the last 3-4 months done to the Indian economy? This is a chart which encompasses the last 40 years of the Indian economic growth, mapping against few key global macro variables, right? This is clearly a global event. We've seen stock markets across the globe being very volatile, particularly in terms of commodity prices such as crude oil price, which has been extremely weak. And also, coincidentally, interest rates have also come off significantly. So if you look at the last 40 years in Indian economic history, there have been 4 periods of consistent or a clear economic boom, right? So very clear periods of strong economic growth. And those are pointed by those red arrows that you see on the chart that's coming up on your screen. The gray patches are periods of US recession or negative US real GDP growth. Almost every red arrow is preceded by a gray patch, which means that almost every Indian economic boom is preceded by a US recession. And I guess there's no doubts about the fact that US is going through a recession now. Perhaps it's going to extend for a longer time, given that US is now at the epicenter of the cases in terms of coronavirus. It's unlikely that the lockdown, or at least self-imposed lockdown, will come back, and hence economic growth will come back. So it's clear that there is a recession. Does that mean that India's economic boom is around the corner? Now, before we answer that, why does a US recession result in an Indian economic boom? Now, India is dependent on the world for 2 key inputs, right? And those 2 clearly are oil. India is roughly a 3% current account deficit economy. Almost bulk of that deficit comes from the import of oil. What's happened to oil, I guess most of you would know. The fall in oil prices from 85 to where it is today is perhaps the most precipitous fall that we've seen in the history of crude oil. And what that means to the Indian exchequer in terms of the fiscal boost that you get indirectly. Remember, the Indian government hasn't passed on any of much of the fall in crude prices, to petrol or diesel prices on the retail front. Therefore, there is an automatic fiscal boost to the Indian government, and perhaps rightly so. The government needs a lot of fiscal ammunition to pull us out of the sort of lull that we've put ourselves, and hence, by various measures, given if oil prices were to stay where they are, we reckon this amounts to almost a 3% of GDP in terms of the fiscal boost. This is a massive boost. If you go back to the previous 3 occasions, you will all see the orange line is the crude oil price, right? Before the first, which we saw around the late 80s, you saw a sharp fall in oil prices. Again, even in the 2008-9, you saw a sharp fall in oil prices. Similarly, in the early part of this decade as well. Now, why do oil prices coincide with a US recession? I guess that's the easiest bit to answer. US is the biggest consumer of oil. If US goes into recession, demand for oil goes down, and therefore oil prices sink. So we've achieved that one big piece in terms of reduction of a key input or key imported commodity for us, which automatically gives us a fiscal boost. The second piece is interest rates, right? How does US recession and interest rates function? Clearly, we've seen the Fed being very, very active, not just in terms of this recession, but also every other recession. The automatic reaction of the Federal Reserve is to reduce interest rates. And increasingly over the last couple of recessions, not just reduce interest rates, but also print a lot of money through quantitative easing or similar such methods, and that has resulted in US 10-year bond yields, the best measure of the cost of capital globally, which almost touched negative territory for a brief period last month, but it's hovering around that 0.5% mark. Now that has two imperatives. It is very positive for India. One is because Federal Reserve and most other G7 central banks have been cutting rate and also printing money to the extent of almost more than $2 trillion in a period of 30 days. Just to give you a context what that means, the last highest month in terms of sort of quantitative easing by the G7 central banks was April 2009. In one single month, they printed as much as $275 billion of monetary stimulus. Last month alone, this corresponding figure was $1.7 trillion, which is almost 6 times higher than the previous high. So we are talking about a completely different level of quantitative easing altogether. And you can see the ramifications of those on global interest rates. Now, if you are a typical pension fund or an endowment fund in the US or in the Western world, with the aim to generate a 5 to 6% return for your retirees or the pensioners that you are serving, with these levels of interest rates, I don't think you'll be able to fulfill that return objective. As a result, you're necessarily bound to move towards higher yield assets. Typically, in this case, emerging markets, particularly emerging Asia, which clearly has shown significant resilience compared to the developed world in terms of handling the coronavirus situation, whether it's China, Taiwan, Korea, Vietnam, etc. And even in some ways, although the cases in India are still rising, the overall number of cases compared to the population and the population density is certainly not alarmist, and even the trajectory is not exponential. And in fact, we have some evidence to that. We do have an offshore fund catering to institutional investors, and we have seen an anecdotal evidence over the last couple of weeks where there is a significant increase in terms of inquiries into our offshore fund. Our offshore fund effectively collects money from foreign investors and investing in India. If we as a very nascent fund house are seeing such increased inquiries, I'm sure a lot of other Indian funds are seeing many more institutional investors or FIIs knocking on their doors to consider investing in India. So clearly that could pave the way for a positive capital account. The $15 billion or so that has left India over the last month or so could come back very quickly as and when the situation sort of normalizes. And the second and the most important thing that we are already experiencing is through the interest rates. Because the government doesn't control everything in its own hands. It needs a helping hand from the RBI through providing a monetary stimulus. But the RBI alone can't do it. Remember, we don't have a reserve currency to print money by ourselves on a standalone basis. The fact that most central banks globally have managed to cut interest rates and print money gives the comfort to the RBI to do the same without having to worry about a significant depreciation in the rupee. Therefore, as you have seen over the last month or so, the RBI has been very, very active. It has explicitly cut interest rates by 75 bips. It has come out with several other measures, including CRR cuts, LTRO, measures to support the debt mutual funds, measures to support NBFCs and so on. If you add up all that stimulus, it comes out to another 100 bips odd in terms of interest rates. So perhaps it also has more room to go, given that the Western central bank has clearly said they are happy to pump in $4 trillion more of money if need be. So that has meant that we've got two of those key variables, money and oil, available at a very cheap price for India to set in a course of an economic recovery. And we have seen that in the past 4 instances, these two variables have been very highly correlated for an Indian economic boom. We can't really pinpoint to when we will set the stage for a recovery, whether it's 3 months from now, 6 months from now. But if you take a 3 to 5 year view, the chances are that the ducks are nicely lined up for an Indian economic recovery. So rather than try and second guess whether the markets have bottomed out, if there'll be another down leg before we get onto a sustained recovery path, you take a relatively longer term view based on fundamentals, and we think we are set for a nice recovery from an economic standpoint.
Sure, thanks Pramod. So let me move on to stock specifics now and fundamentals of our portfolio companies given this event. So I'm going to divide this discussion on our portfolio impact into 2 parts, non-financial separate and financial stocks separate on the next slide. When it comes to the non-financials part of the portfolio, the event, let's first understand what is the nature of the event. So there are 2 types of fundamental events that we are going to face. Point number one is the lockdown itself, logistical challenges, and even once the lockdown has been lifted, social distancing and other constraints on mobility, and as a result, some parts of businesses getting affected even once the lockdown has been lifted, possibly. So that's point number one, which is the lockdown and social distancing, etc. Point number 2 is the second order impact of the first point, which is job losses will be there. Some businesses will perhaps go shut, and there will be some other households which will see salary cuts, etc., and hence a reduction in household income in some cases. That certainly will have an impact on some sectors in terms of their demand, etc. So those are 2 layers of impact. Let's just understand them one by one. When it comes to the broader impact on sectors as a whole, from, let's say, the lockdown or the social distancing, etc., right? The first bullet which appears on the screen in front of you highlights how on the one extreme you will have, let's say, sectors such as tourism, travel, airlines, hotels, entertainment, eating out, luxury spending, so on and so forth. All of these categories will not only see a massive drop in demand during the lockdown phase, they will also perhaps see a massive drop in demand several months after the lockdown has been lifted. And not only is this drop in demand a sort of temporary drop, this is a permanent cancellation during this period. So if let's say you or I were supposed to catch a flight to go to Europe and celebrate our summer holiday this year, or we were supposed to go and watch a movie at the cinema hall, it's not going to be the case that once the lockdown has been lifted, there will be a pent-up demand and we'll do 2 holidays every month or watch 5 movies every day to cover up for the lost time period, right? That demand is lost. It is cancelled demand. Unlike that, what our portfolio companies actually are likely to witness is a lot of resilience in their demand, either during the lockdown phase, but especially after the lockdown has been lifted, because almost all the companies in our portfolio are doing small ticket day-to-day essentials which cannot be easily substituted and cannot be easily cancelled in the demand, because these are utility oriented products and services, and they are consumed by the masses across the country, left, right, and center, every day, every month, every year. Right. So let's just break down our portfolio into 3 buckets. So bucket number 1 is, let's say, the stocks like a Nestle, an Abbott, or a Divi's Lab. Right. These 3 companies in our portfolio are not even witnessing a massive drop in demand during the lockdown phase itself. Right. Abbott manufactures medicines which are OTCs and monopoly drugs in categories such as, let's say, thyroid, or Abbott's Cremafin is a product, so on and so forth. Consumption of these medicines cannot be avoided just because the mobility has been shut down during the lockdown phase. Similarly, let's say a Divi's Lab, it manufactures naproxen with a 70% market share. Naproxen goes in as an API into the manufacture of painkillers across the world, and Divi's has a 70% market share globally. Likewise, dextromethorphan is an API that Divi's Lab manufactures, 40% market share globally, and this gets into the manufacture of cough syrups. Right now, painkillers and cough syrups are actually, instead of being cut down on demand, they are actually witnessing an increase in demand, because people, countries, they want to gather as much as these medicines before a supply chain challenge happens, etc. So a Divi's Lab and Abbott, they are not witnessing any moderation, significant moderation in demand during the lockdown phase. Certainly there will be 1 week or 2 weeks of demand up or down because of supply chain issues, but those are getting resolved with a 1 or 2 week lag. Likewise, when it comes to, say, a Nestle, 2/3 of earnings come from baby milk products, and I don't think parents who have got infants at their home, these parents are not going to say that because Narendra Modi has put a lockdown on us, we are not going to feed our infant with formula milk. Right? The infant doesn't have any other choice but to drink formula milk, and hence you will see a very, very consistent demand even during the lockdown phase for Nestle. Hence, it's also not a surprise that for these 3 companies, their manufacturing plants were up and running either on the same day when the lockdown started, and they've not been shut down ever since, or in case of Nestle, for instance, part of their manufacturing was up and running with a two-day delay after the lockdown started. On 27th of March, they were up and running, and rest of the factories came up for production on 20th of April. Right. So in that way, that's the bucket number 1, not affected even during the lockdown. Let's come to bucket number 2. So bucket number 2 is, let's say, Dr. Lal PathLabs, Relaxo's footwear, or Page Industries is innerwear. These are categories of consumption which can certainly be deferred by a month or 2 or 3 months. Right? But you cannot say that my annual health checkup, which was supposed to tell me my good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, balance or imbalance in 2020, I'll do that annual health checkup next year because for 2 months the country was in a lockdown. You will certainly do it once the lockdown has been lifted. Of course, you might not do it during the lockdown phase, right? Likewise, 130 rupee average price point Relaxo footwear or 150 rupee average price point Page Industries innerwear. You don't buy a Relaxo footwear when you are feeling very good about your salary, your bonus, your environment around you, so on and so forth. You actually buy these products when you need them, right? And if you needed them, you might delay your consumption by a couple of months, maybe 4 months. But it won't be a longer delay than that because these are not aspirations, they are utility-based demands, right? So this is the second category where during the lockdown, certainly factories are shut, retail points of sales are shut. But once the lockdown has been lifted, with let's say a max 2 to 4 months of delay, consumption should get back to normalcy, at least from the demand perspective for these categories as a whole. Right. Third bucket is the paints and adhesives companies that we have in our portfolio. It's quite clear that when it comes to interior and hence inviting labor workforce into your households, you might not do that for the next, say, 3 to 6 months after the lockdown has been lifted. Forget about during the lockdown. no labor workforce can even enter your household even if you want to, right? So these categories might see a lot longer deferment of demand, but putting a simple logic in place to assess whether this is cancellation or deferment. Think about it like this: 85% of paint demand in India is repainting. It's not new housing; it's repainting of households. When it comes to repainting, there will be, let's say, someone like me who might have the average repainting cycle of the country of, let's say, 8 years. And let's say you have another 8 years of repainting cycle. Now, if I had got my house repainted last time in 2012, I'm scheduled for repainting this year in 2020. Right? The lockdown doesn't allow me to get it repainted during the lockdown period. After the lockdown period, I have monsoon, I have apprehensions against bringing via the labor workforce into the household, etc. I might decide, let me get it repainted in the winter of 2020, or let's say next year, 2021. Right? What I will not do is, I will not shift this demand to the end of the next cycle, which is 2028, right? 8 years hence. I will repaint it with a 1 year delay. Now, if you as a different part of consumption universe had got your house repainted last time in 2013, 1 year later than I did, and your repainting schedule was 2021, you will not delay it to 2022. You will still get it done in 2021, assuming 2021 is a lot more normal year for the virus outbreak, etc. Now, what that will mean is 2021, the paint sector will see me coming back and you staying there. So there will be a pent-up demand, and hence over a 2-year rolling period, let's say, or 18-month rolling period, you'll see what happened what happened through the demonetization period as well. That it was a deferment of demand. It was not a cancellation of demand. Right. So putting that simple logic in place, again, we don't see any cancellation in the third bucket. It might be longer deferment for, let's say, half of the demand, which is interior wall repainting. Obviously, exteriors will still get done, industrial paints will still get done, so on and so forth. Institutional sales will happen, but interiors for repainting cycles might not happen, right? So that's how I think it's worth thinking about the categories per se. Now let's come to the second order effect that I talked about, that within the paint category, within the Bacche Ka Doodh, within the Abbott, Divi's or Relaxo Page Industries type of a demand, there will be, let's say, X number of households, whatever that number is, 5%, 7%, 2%, X number of households who would have lost their jobs, who would have seen a reduction in household income 6 months out as well. And these households might cut down on their spend, which otherwise would have happened for these categories. Let's take that as a worst case scenario as well. Now, in that case, the market share aspect of a winning company will perhaps provide an offset against the adverse effect of the second order of job losses, business shutdowns, etc. Right? So there will be companies in every sector which will have a massive market share gain because their competition got pulverized during the crisis and after the crisis, and this market share gain acceleration, which otherwise would not have happened, will more than offset the adverse effect of any negative demand on the sector as a whole. So let's take 3 simple ways to understand this, which are the 3 bullets in front of you. Point number 1, take the example of, say, an Asian Paints, right? Asian Paints has given around 8 to 10,000 rupees of cash transfer directly into the bank accounts of 40,000 painters, contractors over the last 1 month. Berger has done some 6,000 rupees of cash transfer into some 12,000 painters in the month of March, and I think a much larger number in the month of April as per press articles, right? So these companies are providing something which was always very unheard of in the paint sector, especially. Asian Paints, for the first time in its history, we are hearing, is giving 45 days of extended credit period on top of the normal credit period, where they're saying you pay us within 45 days and you take the 2% cash discount, which otherwise you would have got for payment within only 7 days. Right? So they're extending the credit period. They're keeping the terms and conditions same for cash discount, etc. During that 45-day long credit period. They're also giving a lot of other support. For instance, they are saying we'll give you comprehensive COVID-19 insurance to your shop employees to contractors associated with your shops. As dealers, we'll give you this service, and we'll also provide you free of cost sanitization of your paint dealership, your shop, once the lockdown has been lifted, so on and so forth. Likewise, when it comes to, let's say, Page Industries, competition of Page, which is very either debt ridden, or their working capital cycles are 6, 7, 8 months long, and hence their ability to provide a lot of financing relief to their channel partners is very low. That sort of a competition has already so that competition before the coronavirus crisis used to offer 3 to 4 months of credit to the channel. Through the crisis, they don't have the ability to extend the 3-4 months of credit to 7-8 months of credit. Whereas Page Industries used to offer only 1 month of credit at max. Their working capital cycle is one third that of their competition. Their return on capital employed is 5 to 10 times higher than that of their competition. Cash generation as a result is very strong, and they are extending extra 60-90 days of credit to their distribution channel partners, right? These sorts of support functions, support systems that our portfolio companies are providing, which their competition isn't, are likely to build not just a lot of goodwill, but that will translate into a massive market share gain over a longer term perspective, thanks to this crisis. That's exactly what happened during demonetization, GST types of events, where over the last 5 years, lack of investment capex, lack of GST demonetization, the disruption from GST demonetization did have an effect on Sensex earnings, Nifty earnings growth, overall GDP growth. But our portfolio companies, they continued to compound at above 20% CAGR over the last 3 years, last 5 years. Right? That's the effect of market share gain acceleration, which we are, I think, likely to see in future as well. The second point is a lot more on control on manufacturing, control on supply chains, etc. So very quick points again to highlight as examples. So Page Industries and Relaxo are in the two most labor-intensive manufacturing industries. The entire competition of Page and Relaxo, they go for contract labor manufacturing, and these two companies go for complete in-house manufacturing, which means that the labor workforce is on their payrolls as employees. What that will do is migration of people from larger cities to the villages over the last couple of months that we've already seen has been more prevalent in the cases where livelihoods have been jeopardized thanks to this crisis, thanks to the lockdown, which will be the fact for contract labor, not for employed labor, right? So once the lockdown has been lifted, competition of these companies in our portfolio, competition's manufacturing plants will not be able to come back to life or normalcy in a very short span of time, whereas for our portfolio companies, that will not be the case, right? Similarly, let's say you compare Dr. Lal PathLabs with Thyrocare. Thyrocare outsources test tubes, hand gloves, franchisees, economics, etc. Completely, compared to Dr. Lal PathLabs, where he says that not only will I, as Dr. Lal, provide the test tubes, hand gloves, lab technicians, I will also ensure that the franchisee had opened his store 3 years ago, 5 years ago, in an appropriate place. I might have got involved in discussions with the landlords of the place to help the franchisee negotiate an agreement, etc. As a result, during a demonetization, during a COVID-19 lockdown phase, Dr. Lal PathLabs will get involved in negotiations with these landlords to cut down on rental cost pressures that the franchisee will face when the demand has conked off, right? So that sort of a support is also an indication of how you will see resumption to normalcy being much quicker for our portfolio companies vis-a-vis their competitors. And I can keep going on and on, distributor-oriented supply chains versus wholesale-oriented, so on and so forth, right? Now, coming to the last point, which is actually the icing on the cake. So not only are our portfolio companies the highest ROCE and hence highly cash generative, with ability to finance the stress faced by the channel partners, etc., from the balance sheet. They also benefited last year from our finance ministry cutting down the corporate tax rate cut from 36% 36% to 25%. In our portfolio, almost all companies were paying 36% compared to their competition, who were either non-profitable or they were paying a high tax rate with a very low PAT margin. Right? Our portfolio had a high PAT margin, high tax rate, and as a result, when they got the free gift of surplus capital thanks to corporate tax rate cut, they are today in a very strong position vis-a-vis competition to use this capital through, let's say, price cuts on their products, use the capital to accelerate capex, provide some support during the lockdown phase to their channel partners, etc., and hence suffocate competition meaningfully, thereby gaining market share over the next 2, 3, 4 years. Right. So that's in a way a framework to choose, and as I explained with examples, our portfolio companies are the best suited in this framework. Now let's come to the financials part. So as I think all of you would know, we have 3 financials companies in our portfolio: HDFC Bank, Bajaj Finance, and Kotak. The way we think this is the best way to get exposed to lenders in this sort of a crisis is that the winning lenders through such a crisis demonstrate 2 characteristics. Characteristic number 1, an ability to survive through the crisis without need for let's say a bailout or capital infusion, and hence no challenge on survival per se. And the second aspect is the ability to accelerate loan book growth once this crisis is behind us, because certainly 2, 3, 4 years after this crisis has been put behind us, competitive intensity will be very benign, and firms with adequate funds available on the balance sheet to accelerate loan book growth will find themselves in a very good sweet spot to gain market share. Their ROEs perhaps will go to all-time highs. Their loan book growth perhaps will go to all-time highs. So the best way to understand this via example are the 2 tables at the bottom of this slide. On the left is HDFC Limited during the NBFC crisis. On the right is HDFC Bank during the global financial crisis. And since the NBFC crisis of 97-98 is more than 20 years old, we might have forgotten the intensity of it. So let me just give you a data point to remind you. 85% of the NBFCs that were in existence in India before this 97-98 crisis were shut down during that 2-year period, right? The number of such NBFCs that were shut down was more than 52,000, right? 52,000 NBFCs were shut down during the 97-98 crisis. And what happened as a result to an HDFC Limited, which at that time was 6-7% market share in the overall credit in the industry, was you can see their NPAs went up, their net interest margins compressed, loan book growth moderated substantially, and their PE multiples dropped down to less than half of what it was in 1996, right? 20 times coming down to 8 times. I think a very similar thing will happen to our portfolio companies as well. Next couple of quarters, you will see a substantial moderation on loan book growth. For the couple of months of lockdown, absolutely the loan book growth will be a massive negative YOY in terms of disbursements. And you will also see NPAs rise for HDFC Bank, for Bajaj Finance, for Kotak. That's I would say almost a guarantee, right? That the financials will deteriorate for a quarter or 2. But what you will see thereafter is these are the 3 best funded lenders, I think, that you can invest in, which can survive through the crisis and then accelerate their loan book growth to gain market share, which what you see in HDFC Limited's case, their ROEs went to as high as 27% 4 years after the end of that crisis. HDFC Bank's ROEs went up to their all-time highs, and their loan book growth also accelerated, which obviously you can imagine what would have happened to earnings growth and share price movement given the PE multiple went back up to the pre-crisis levels, right? So that's I think the way to look at winners in the lending space. Now, just to put a few numbers here, for instance, to provide comfort on Bajaj Finance, etc., because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on that. So let me answer those upfront. So someone has, I think, asked a question already in the chat window about the unsecured portfolio of Bajaj Finance. So let's quickly go through the orientation of the loan book of Bajaj Finance. Half of it is secured, right, by home loans, by vehicle loans, etc. Half of the loan book is secured. The remaining half, which is unsecured, has got a third of it exposed to doctors community, business loan, personal loan, another third exposed to largely chartered accountants community. And doctors and chartered accountants, I don't think are going to see a structural challenge from the coronavirus crisis in their ability to repay their loans to begin with, right? There will be obviously some doctors and some chartered accountants who will default, but it's not a structural challenge, right? So if you look at it like that, 80-85% of the loan book, we don't see being in a structurally challenged position on NPA risk through this crisis. That's point number one. Now let's come to the balance sheet strength side. So their asset liability management is probably the most favorable possible situation that you can ever have. So the asset side of the loan book is roughly 12 months in its duration, because the unsecured book is 6 to 8 months in duration, and obviously the secured book is a lot longer, with home loans being 7-8 years average duration. The liability side of their loan book is 3 to 5 year duration for the bulk of it, right? Bulk of it as in 80-90% of the liabilities are locked up with 3 to 5 year of duration. What does that mean? To put it very simply, what that means is on the unsecured loan book side, 6 to 8 months of duration means they can Bajaj Finance can reprice the loan upwards through this crisis to expand their net interest margin, which is not the case with competition, where competition is sitting on long dated loan book and short dated liabilities. The short dated the short dated liability for competition means refinancing will be a requirement on their liability side, on their funding side, every now and then. That too, for a struggling NBFC with a weak balance sheet, we are seeing CP/CD rates. They are shooting through the roof, going above 300 bips, 200 bips compared to what they were 6 months ago or 1 year ago. For a Bajaj Finance, actually, it's the reverse that is happening. To begin with, they will not see refinancing requirements on their liability side of the balance sheet every now and then, because it's a longer dated liabilities. And also, we are seeing CPs and CDs of Bajaj Finance being priced at, I think 5.5% 3-4 weeks ago, 4.5% last week, so on and so forth, right? So net interest margins actually for our portfolio lenders are already expanding through the crisis, right? They are able to reprice the assets upwards, and liabilities, whatever are coming up for refinancing, are being priced downwards. So the net interest margin is expanding. Something similar to what you saw with HDFC Bank in the table on the bottom right. During the crisis, their net interest margins expanded, right? On top of it, you've got 25% capital adequacy ratio for Bajaj Finance, 18% HDFC Bank. You've got 16,000 crores of surplus liquidity with Bajaj Finance. 50,000 crores is the number for HDFC Bank. And you've got a very, very strong parent with a few $1 billion of surplus capital on the balance sheet of Bajaj Holdings, right? So when you put all of this together, the ability for a Bajaj Finance to survive through the crisis, I think, is the highest amongst all the NBFCs that we can think of. Now, when it comes to the PE multiple, certainly you can see HDFC Bank and GFC or HDFC Limited in 97, 98, PE multiples do compress. These are lenders which are leveraged. There's a lot of panic around them in a crisis like this. As a result, the PE multiple, it compresses more meaningfully than what it does on the rest of the consistent compounders portfolio, and hence not a surprise. Bajaj Finance is actually at half of its share price levels over the last 3-4 months. HDFC Bank, I think, is down some 20, 30, 40% or something like that. So that's a natural phenomenon, but the recovery also is equally sharp. So that's in a nutshell the way to look at the financials part. Now, coming to the next bit, which I'm sure, and I could already see in the list of questions that Sankalp had sent to us, Kamal Manocha had sent to us before the webinar started. Somebody had asked in a different way, why are we not timing? Why are we not taking cash calls? Why are we not sitting on 10-20% of our portfolio as cash and then wait for a certain level of PE multiple on the Nifty and then enter, etc., etc. Right? So let's just understand a simple maths around this. The table on the top left, table on the top left shows you when you look at Sensex as an example of, let's say, a mediocre quality asset class, right? Sensex undergoes twice as much as the drawdown that a CCP undergoes, right? The CCP that we've taken to understand the 2008 drawdown is a combination of 6 companies: HDFC Bank, HDFC Limited, Cipla, Infosys, Asian Paints, and Hero MotoCorp, right? See, these are the 6 companies which, if you've read our books, Unusual Billionaires and Coffee Can Investing, these are the 6 companies which were the most regular members of the CCP portfolios at that time. So a portfolio of such companies fell by around 30% at that time versus 70% for the market. So 100 rupee entry point pre-crash for Sensex was available at 30 rupees at the bottom in March 2009. Likewise, 100 rupee entry point for CCP was available at 70 rupees at the bottom in March 2009. Right? Now, the long-term earnings compounding of a Sensex is never expected to be more than 10-12%, although it has delivered much less than that over the last decade. But had you expected a 12% compounding in the Sensex earnings, you would have said without a timing benefit, your 100 rupees was supposed to compound at 12% to become 300 in 10 years. And if you had entered at 30 rupees, the 30 would have compounded at 26% to become the same 300 at the end of 10 years. So you add the timing benefit in a perfect manner to the 2008 crash, your 12% compounding becomes 26%. And there's a massive gap between 12 and 26, both in terms of the quantum, which is a 14% delta to the CAGR, but also in the nature of the outcome. Because at 12%, you are just barely meeting your lifestyle cost inflation, but at 26%, you are creating incremental wealth, right? Now, when it comes to CCP, your earnings for CCP were expected to deliver mid-20s outcome. They have actually delivered a mid-20s outcome. And what that would have meant was 100 rupees would have become 1000 rupees without the timing benefit. If you added the timing benefit, the 70 would have become 1000, which meant the 26% CAGR without timing went up to 30% CAGR with timing benefit, right? Now, to begin with, the 26 versus 30 gap is very, very narrow. Secondly, 26 is also a happy, healthy outcome for wealth creation, and 30% is also an equally happy, healthy outcome for wealth creation. Right now, you might say, why not go for the extra 4%? Why not time CCP entry exits if you can? Right. So let's say we do have Divya Drishti, we do have the hand of God on our head, and we can time the drawdown perfectly. If we can do that, the difficulty we will face is that the text on the bottom right of this slide shows you the window of opportunity available to time a CCP is 1/5 or 1/10 of the size of the window of opportunity available to time Sensex Nifty. After the 2008 crash, Sensex Nifty took 20 long months, which is from March 2009 to November 2010, to get back to their pre-crash levels of January 2008. Whereas the CCP companies, they took no more than 2.5 to 3 months to come back to their pre-crash level. So the likes of Asian Paints, Cipla, Hero MotoCorp, Infosys were actually back within a month. HDFC Bank took the longest, 7 months in this portfolio. Overall, it was a 2.5-3 month recovery period. Right? Now, what that means is you need to get convinced during that 2.5-3 month period that this was the bottom. This was not a bear market rally, as the question that Sankalp asked at the beginning of the webinar. And I mean, what Pramod mentioned, it's almost impossible to time it, impossible to say that this is not a bear market rally, this is a proper rally, and let me get back in, right? Best example of this, again, from the last two months of experiences, our portfolio companies, they fell down by less than half as much as their benchmark indices. So whether it be CCP, where we saw 12.9% drawdown between 1st of Jan and 31st of March versus Nifty Sensex drawdown of 29% over the same 3-month period, or whether it be LCP where the drawdown was 15.5% versus 30% plus for BSE small cap index. And then when it came to the recovery, within 3-4 weeks after 31st of March, LCP has recovered the entire drawdown when BSE small cap index is still I think 20% below its all-time high, and CCP I think is minus 5% versus 1st of Jan or something less than that, I guess, when Sensex Nifty are still I think 20-25% below their all-time highs, right? So the window of opportunity that was available to you, if this is a proper rally, was only 4 weeks. Even if this is not a proper rally, even if we are headed for another 50% crash in the market and our portfolio goes down by another 25% from here, whatever, whenever that recovery eventually comes, will also be in a similar way, very narrow window and very sharp and soon a quick recovery for our portfolio companies, unlike the Sensex Nifty. So it makes sense to time relatively mediocre quality assets, because actually without timing you might not be able to create wealth through them, but it doesn't make sense to time the CCP, LCP type of companies. So that's I hope it addresses all timing related questions. This is the performance as on 31st of March, and this is the performance as on 30th of April in front of you. So I'll stop here. Sankalp, if you want to moderate, yeah, Q&A.
Thank you, Rakshit. You have actually made my job a lot easier. But sorry, I might not be able to reciprocate and have to ask a few difficult questions.
Sure.
So the first question that I would like to take is, there's an allocation to ITC in our portfolio.
Yeah.
Now, quickly, because we want to take a couple of more questions, can you explain to us what beholds at ITC for the next couple of quarters or so?
Okay, so next couple of quarters, I think not just ITC, our entire portfolio will be hammered on fundamentals. Let's just take it on the chin. I don't think any stock in our portfolio is going to report a 25% YOY revenue growth. Maybe a Divi's or an Abbott might be exceptions, but bulk of our portfolio will not, right? So next couple of quarters, ITC chodo, sab kuch hi, I think.
Okay, let's take it this way. What will be the recovery for ITC like when that eventually happens?
Right. So to begin with, the category is quite sinful. 2/3 of tobacco consumption, 2/3 of cigarette consumption is BD and by volume, and only 1/3 is cigarette. That too, around 75% of cigarette consumers are dual consumers of BD and cigarette. And as a result, there's a very long way to go for ITC within the smoking tobacco category. Within the smoking tobacco category, there's a very long runway ahead. There is a possibility that as I said, the overall pie might get affected for a year or two or even longer in some categories, including consumption of tobacco here, smoking tobacco. But our simple maths on ITC is the following. Last 5 years, last 3 years, their earnings compounding, let's say FY 17 to 20 or FY 15 to 20, has been around 11-12%, which is a shade lower than what we would have expected, around say a 12-13% odd, right? So that's where earnings compounding was. On top of it, what ITC today sits on is some 35,000 crores of surplus cash, which has got accumulated only over the last 3 years. And this surplus cash, if you read the fine print of some of their announcements that have come out over the last couple of months, there is an indication that it might be returned to shareholders as dividends. The normal dividend yield before you come to surplus cash itself, normal dividend yield is around 7% as of today, and add special dividend or something else on top, you are comfortably getting to a high single digit, if not double digit, addition from capital return on an annualized basis for the next 1-2 years. If you add then earnings growth of say 10, 11, 12, whatever that number might be, and you can take your pick, the total shareholder return from an ITC is not likely to be below say a 15% in the worst case scenario. Now, Is that all right for us? Perfectly all right. What if PE multiples go down to half of what they are today, the way they have gone down to half of what they were, I think, 3 years ago? We can't time it, unfortunately. So the worst case scenario is the PE multiples will be offset by earnings and total shareholder return, etc. The net, you might not make much money. That's the worst case scenario from a 1 year, 2 year perspective. But bearing that aspect in mind itself, ITC is also the smallest allocation in our portfolio, and we'll keep reviewing the weightage.
Sure, thank you. So the next question quickly is again a very interesting one. So at the top of my mind, I can think sectors like insurance, likely specialty chemicals, or a few others probably gaining a lot from the change that is about to happen. So your view on the next sectors that might lead going ahead when the recovery happens. So would like to, I mean, I think that would be really great.
Yeah, so it's perfectly right. Something like an insurance, it's very right to see that penetration levels are low. New entrants will not easily come in given the regulatory construct in this sector, so on and so forth. Specialty chemicals, possibly substitution from China, I don't know, and secular demand, etc. So that's the case. So is the case with even hand sanitizers, hand wash, so on and so forth. Too many sectors per se will see an increase in demand, possibly either because of coronavirus or even otherwise they were supposed to. We do have a couple of chemical companies in the Little Champs portfolio as our portfolio holdings, which will benefit from this. We don't have any specialty chemicals company in our consistent compounders portfolio because and the same answer applies to say even in the insurance sector. We haven't yet come to a very high degree of conviction on the ability to deliver for these companies what we expect a consistent compounder to deliver. But that might just be either our lack of enough understanding or the companies might not be as great. But also remember, there aren't too many companies in either specialty chemicals in the large cap space or insurance
beyond
which have delivered
chemicals, maybe new sectors that might see that kind of growth.
So what I would point you towards is a newsletter which we published a few hours back today itself, where we said that disruption to begin with is a norm, right? And coronavirus might be a very big disruptor itself as an event. Right now, there are two ways to invest through a disruptive regime. Approach number one is pick up a newcomer which will disrupt an incumbent, right? And approach number two is pick up an existing leadership of an existing, let's say, a consistent compounder, which will actually continue to disrupt the future as well, and it will not be disrupted by competition, and the leadership will stay intact, and it will actually benefit from the event that is coming up. Right. So in that way, our preferences are always to go for the latter, not the former. So there will be some categories in future which will disrupt today's categories. There will be some companies in the future which will disrupt today's market leaders. We don't want to speculate on that because that's a very high risk approach towards trying to benefit from a disruption. But if let's say blockchain is a disruptive event, and if Asian Paints and HDFC Bank are the two biggest consumers of blockchain as a technology to disrupt their competition, then rather than betting on a company which makes blockchain based products, we would actually back a company which has showed us a track record of using technology to their benefit, and hence likelihood of them using blockchain also in a more proactive manner than their competition to their benefit, right? So just read our newsletter from today, you will understand the answer to this, and hence our portfolio has actually not changed at all. And unless and until we see some of our portfolio companies getting disrupted, we are not in a mood to change our approach towards maintaining the low risk element, because it's very exciting. मैं कल का उभरता सितारा पकड़ूंगा, right? That's a very exciting approach, but excitement is always risky. And we don't want to take risk in exchange for maybe a healthier return than what we would have otherwise delivered to our investors.
I like to add to Rakshit's point on that, and that's a very important point when it comes to investors understanding our investment philosophy, right? One of the things that easy for everybody to see is demand for this product is rising, demand for that product is booming and stuff, right? That's the easiest part, but not necessarily the most attractive part while investing in a stock. If demand for any product is rising, if you can see it, if everybody can see it, clearly the number of competitors entering that product category will also increase. What then will decide whether any company in that product category will actually make money is the competitive advantage, is the moat, is its ability to differentiate from competition from a sustainable basis. So from an investment strategy perspective, more than the demand, particularly in a country like India where there is no scarcity of demand for any product, right? So we are still a very poor country, a third world country, for demand for most products will sustain for several decades from here. So the important area to focus rather is not whether demand for this product will grow or not, whether the company that you're considering will have a distinct competitive advantage over everybody else in that product category. So for example, life insurance, clearly there's a long growth runway. So far most life insurance companies have actually sold asset management products, right? ULIPs and so on. It's not really term insurance. So the risk-based insurance penetration is significantly low. But having said that, do life insurers or the life insurance company under consideration have some sort of unique competitive advantage which will make it difficult for its competitors to replicate? That is what will create the excess return on capital over cost of capital, not the growth by itself.
Thank you, Pramod. So quickly, before we conclude and take other questions over email, the last question that I would like to ask, probably Rakshit, you can answer is, what about the other NBFC? Since we spent a lot of time on Bajaj Finance and HDFC, there India has a lot of good and big sizable NBFCs and banks. Typically, if I have to name ICICI and Axis, they have also recently seen management change and a cleanup of their house, and to put their house in order. What is your view on these particular beyond the three NBFCs that and BFSIs that you own? What is your view and any advice to investors on them?
There are various ways to make money to begin with in the stock market, and hence if you want to pick up a turnaround company, etc., there are lots there in the lending space available as options, and I'm sure you are referring to some of them, where management team has been replaced. It has become a much better management team than their predecessors, and future might be bright, and these firms might actually deliver a better earnings growth compared to an HDFC Bank or a Bajaj Finance. Given the turnaround aspect. So that's certainly an area. Another area where you will see is there will be emergence of newer NBFCs possibly over the next 5 years. Once all of this is behind us, 3 years down the line, the next NBFC which might become the future AU Bank or the Yes Bank or DHFL or HDFC Bank or Kotak Bank, all these sorts of lenders will emerge, and it's a prudent way to do it. But our approach is that, first of all, look for companies which have already gone through ups and downs in the last 10, 15, 20-year history without getting disrupted by either events or evolutions or scalability or let's say internal management change, capital allocation, etc. Right? There aren't too many companies out there to begin with which would fit this criterion, and amongst those which do fit, I think these are the only three that we have found suitable enough to be held in a portfolio.
Sure, fine enough.
Key point to look for while assessing financials, like Rakshit mentioned, for all three examples, is not so much of its lending capability. Lending money is perhaps the easiest thing to do, right? Growing a loan book in a bull market is perhaps the easiest thing to do. Whether your asset quality remains intact, again, is not dependent on any particular great ability to decipher one borrower from the other, because ultimately a borrower will go for whoever is lending at the lowest rate. Therefore, the critical factor for a lender becomes its input cost. What's an input cost for an NBFC? It's money itself. It's the deposits, right? Therefore, HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, and Bajaj Finance within our portfolio. Perhaps you can also add Axis Bank and ICICI Bank, which have had one of the strongest CASA franchises as well, which define their low cost of funding. If you are equipped with low cost of funds, then you don't really have to go up the risk ladder to make a comfortable net interest margin or return on equity. You can cherry pick the lowest risk borrower and still make a healthy ROE without having to take higher risk. So rather than looking at the asset side of the balance sheet, a typical thing for a lender has to be look for the deposit side of the balance sheet, whether they are able to raise deposits at low cost or not.
That's great insight, Pramod. I thank the Marcellus team for coming coming on our webinar today. We at PMS AIF World, we are a new age content-based wealth management firm, and we keep doing webinars like this for the rest of the month, deep into May. And you can get to know more about these Marcellus's portfolios at our website www.pmsaifworld.com. And we manage close to 400 crores in assets, and we help around 100 SNI and NRI families invest. So thank you, Pramod. Thank you, Rakshit, for being with us today. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.